Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to the speaker series for the Graduate Student Speaker Series as part of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. Our guest this morning is Cyatharine Alias, and she's in the Department of Urban and Environmental Policy and Planning. We're going to allow about 30 minutes for the full session and about 5 minutes at the end for questions. So if you, without further ado, we will get started.
Okay, great. Thanks everyone for joining. Let me just share my screen. So this presentation is a part of what my thesis was. And so I'm going to be looking at the democratization piece of power for the just transition. So the thesis overall explored Action for a Healthy Holyoke campaign to transform the Mount Tom coal plant into a renewable, economically revitalizing site. The Mount Tom coal plant closed in 2014 and was one of the top tax revenue generating sites in the city. In 2017, it became a solar farm. So what is the story of this transition? ENGIE and news outlets point to economics, but there's a story of building community power in the details. So just to give some context, Holyoke is in Western Massachusetts. It is a majority-minority city with a little over half identifying as Latinx. Additionally, it is a city of lower income people with about half of the median income compared to the state. So getting to know the campaign a little bit, in the early 2010s, regional environmental activists, Conservation Law Foundation, and Sierra Club informed local Holyoke Neighbor to Neighbor chapter, which is an organizing group within Holyoke. They informed them about the coal plant's harms. And so Neighbor to Neighbor chapter, along with other groups, decided to form the AHH Coalition. But as a city of multiple marginal identities, the focus shifted from just closing the coal plant to becoming an opportunity for a different and just future. They conducted a multi-pronged approach to advance their vision for a renewable and revitalized Holyoke. To analyze this campaign, I used the Just Transition framework, which AHH also used halfway through their campaign. I also conducted unstructured interviews with stakeholders in the campaign and conducted a document analysis of news articles, reports, and other written materials I could find, as well as videos that AHH had created back then. I just wanted to note that, unfortunately, I wasn't able to interview any of the main Latinx members, so I don't include the reflections in the campaign and how it impacted the community. So today I'm going to review the Just Transition framework. And because I'm focusing specifically on the democratization piece, I'm going to talk about AHH power building during the campaign, the public process, and the limitations in building power without ultimately democratizing power, and then end with lessons learned. I want to note that though I kind of talk about things consecutively because it's hard to talk about multiple things happening at the same time, many things were happening concurrently during the actual campaign. So let's begin. What is the Just Transition framework? Its premise talks about how corporations chase for continual increased profits with little regard for life has led to environmental degradation and poor life quality for many people. It seeks to rejuvenate society to become more just by addressing distributional, procedural, and restorative justice. Distributional justice makes sure that communities at sites of production and disposal do not face worse outcomes than those using the resources. Procedural justice ensures community voice in decisions, not just those of corporations and those with financial capital. Restorative justice seeks to repair the harms produced from current systems. So how can a just society happen? The Just Transition suggests that we need to regenerate resources instead of extracting and dumping. So we have a new and different relationship with Earth. We need to restructure the economy to prioritize human labor over profit. And this is possible when we seek to democratize power. We need to give decision-making authority to local communities instead of global corporations, so that choices are made with a local ecology in mind and not just about profits, and without regard for how production and disposal might harm the communities around them. So implementing a just transition requires community power building against the corporation and in partnership with the city. So what did AHH do during their campaign? AHH did several things to get ENGIE to act. Remember, ENGIE is the owner of the coal plant site. So ENGIE is the main decision maker about what can happen there. So AHH tried to connect with the union of workers who are coal plant workers. They had created a coalition, and as part of this coalition, some local unions like United Auto Workers, SEIU, and Jobs with Justice joined our steering committee. And so once we had the backing of labor, we asked what the most strategic way would be to reach out to the union workers at the coal plant. They tried to meet with the union and the union steward, but the union coal plant union workers didn't want to participate in the partnership because they were afraid of losing their livelihoods. So though this failed, AHH learned from the union steward about what the coal plant workers wanted. They didn't just want new jobs or job training, they also wanted a bridge to retirement because so many were more elderly and were just about to retire. And part of the reason why even they continue to advocate for this because AHH wanted to show everyone and show ENGIE that they were considering the community and the workers, and that just trying to think about the community without thinking about the workers could be a detriment to a world for a just future. They also had used media power. One of the lead organizers talked about, we received press coverage in the major local daily paper, The Republican, and succeeded in publishing a letter to the editor and an op-ed describing our vision of Holyoke beyond coal. They wanted to gather attention and show ENGIE that there is a full steam, a full river of people who are working towards closing this, and that they are going to make sure that everyone knows about it. Because as a global corporation, ENGIE is based in France, they might not be paying attention to smaller actions, and so they need to make sure it was in the media and getting a lot of press coverage. And despite all this attention, ENGIE still didn't want to respond to AHH. They refused to meet with AHH. And so they decided to go to civil disobedience. AHH chose to escalate and found ENGIE's regional office in Connecticut. We delivered the letter about meeting with us or protesting. At this point, ENGIE responded. ENGIE responded to the threat of civil disobedience and decided to meet. This allowed AHH members to share their hopes and visions for what the Mount Tom coal plant could become. Concurrently to trying to create this communication and getting ENGIE to act, AHH also partnered with the city. They decided to form a coalition. They created a coalition with the marginalized residents within the community, residents from all 7 wards, small and local businesses, local unions, regional residents, and regional environmental experts. One member said, "We do not feel we have to be so isolated and alone. Within the community, there are large quantities of valuable experience and strong skills." In addition to this, by forming a coalition, they could create credibility with the city. They could show all the people that really wanted something to happen and get the city to move and act. Additionally, with the help with regional experts, they could provide the data and stories to help prove their point. Additionally, they use electoral power. Neighbor to Neighbor, which is one group within AHH, was a 501c4. And so elected officials knew they could turn out hundreds of people to vote. They knew we could turn out public members to public forums again and again to show that they really cared about the issue. And leading those panels were Virginia Perez and Carmen Concepcion, some of the members of AHH. By being a 501c4, they could endorse candidates. And so candidates wanted to get Neighbor to Neighbors or AHH's support. And then when these candidates were elected, AHH could push them to be accountable to what they had said that they would do. This led to the Citizen Advisory Group. And the Citizen Advisory Group was an opportunity for the community residents to work with the city to think about what could happen to this site. Think about getting funding for a reuse study and make the reuse study happen. In addition to this, they also conducted research and created consensus. AHH named the Mount Tom coal plant the ugly duckling to the rest of ENGIE's renewable energy properties. The strategy was to transform this ugly duckling. AHH worked with another regional expert, environmental expert, Toxics Action Center, and they were able to find this information. Then they created consensus within the group to see if this is the vision that they wanted, whether or not they wanted a solar farm. And then with that, they worked with their coalition to help the city organize towards this vision. So what were the outcomes of this organizing? AHH organizing led to the closure of the coal plant. It closed sooner than anticipated, but from many people's perspectives. For example, in 2012, the company had decided to delist from ISO New England, which is kind of like the energy group that determines where energy goes to in the state. And they delisted for 2016 to 2017, but they ended up closing in 2014. Additionally, coal plant workers got a bridge to retirement if they had reached the age, and those who didn't got a severance package and training. There was a reuse study. Because of the pressure the community had put on the city had reached out to the state for funding for a reuse study. The state also was thinking, in order to create a solar farm, there has to be funding. Initial can be pretty expensive, and so the state was thinking that if ENGIE, the private entity, wanted any kind of funding, they would need to get the city approval. And because the city had seen all the work AHH had done, the city wanted to make sure the public was included in the reuse study. And so there was public participation, which allowed for generation of additional ideas. Furthermore, the city got ENGIE to attend those meetings so that ENGIE could listen and hear what the community wanted. However, there were some mixed results. The solar farm was created, as we can see here, but the community had also wanted an economically vibrant hub where they can have multiple green jobs, create new jobs, and rejuvenate Holyoke's economy. However, because it's just a solar farm, it requires way fewer workers than the coal plant did. And currently there are no other plans for businesses on the site. Furthermore, despite all the community engagement in this process, since then there has been pushback against community engagement in the energy system. For example, Holyoke Gas and Electric, which is a public municipal light plant, so it's owned by the city. AHH had, Neighbor to Neighbor, which was one of the organizations within AHH, had tried to get them to make sure that they didn't expand gas pipelines, but HG&E kind of refused to meet with them and didn't really respond to all the coalition work they did. They eventually did get it to stop because the mayor was responsive, but the fact that HG&E, which is a municipal light plant, wasn't as welcoming to community engagement is slightly problematic. So what led to these mixed results at the end? I think it's partly due to the lack of democratization. One person said about the citizen advisory group, the city council did not create a clear mandate about the authority of the CAG. It was an advisory role, so it didn't have any authority to make any decisions. Additionally, it was an advisory role to the city. It wasn't even an advisory role to ENGIE. So the main decision maker, there was still no direct communication to them. For another piece, one of the coal plant workers shared with me that talked about the reuse study and said, it's nice to have the community together, but the public doesn't own the land. There are a lot of grand ideas, but at the end of the day, the company is going to choose what they want to do because it is their land. It's private land. There's no regulations for the public to have any input on it. ENGIE could do whatever they want. So they were able to do a solar farm because they got the finances to support it to happen. But as of yet, they are not necessarily committed to creating that new climate hub with new jobs there. Furthermore, in democratization, it's important to have community participation. And one organizer talked about how at the beginning of the citizen advisory group, they were, community members were able to stay engaged because there's a broader picture about what the CAG's role was about getting funding for the state. But then it got really technical and people dropped off. In order for democratization to happen, there has to be participation. But it's hard to participate for everyday people when they're not experts in like reuse studies or land policies or necessarily the economics of how to fund things. There needs to be technical support, technical experts to support. And that's something that the CAG actually didn't have much funding or staff support until later on when the reuse study began. And so for a couple of years, the community members were kind of lost on the board. And so it's really important that when we have these groups, there has to be support. We can't have democratization if there's a lack of technical expertise and support for the community members. So this case provides an opportunity to learn about how to create the just transition. We need to increase activists' ability to use electoral power. Electoral power was critical to getting government officials to listen. We need to make sure that state and federal lawmakers remove obstacles for public participation, because right now, often corporations with the financial capital are the ones who are able to impact our politics. We need to increase residents' direct line of communication with private entities. AHH struggled to get ENGIE to listen. The government should create partnerships or regulations ensuring public residents and the private can meet, instead of just suggesting that ENGIE meet. They should require that ENGIE meet with AHH or with the community at large. More than that, the government should also require that the private include public bodies in decision-making for issues that affect their localities, so that the community, the people who are affected by whatever the private business is doing, has a say in what is happening. We need to demand that communities use new structures for decision-making power. We saw the power of the Citizen Advisory Group. It was able to increase public opinion and get a public restudy with public participation, but it had no authority. We need to make sure that residents have decision-making power. And when in these structures that create decision-making power, there needs to be technical support from professionals. Professionals need to be accountable to the public, not just to private corporations. And practice. We need to build community-based examples of democratized institutions. As I briefly mentioned, AHH practiced building consensus, which was really important so that everyone, this diverse coalition, could be on the same page about what to go towards. And that is an example of democracy, building consensus, not just a simple majority. Additionally, since then, Neighbor to Neighbor, one of the groups within AHH, and another group, Nueva Esperanza, in 2019 has started to work on creating a climate hub initiative that centers the voices of marginalized residents as well as others in the community. And they are trying to create what the community had envisioned before. So we keep supporting community-based organizations and the work that they do to create new versions of the future that will make it more likely to increase the scale or keep popping up new ideas to support and create a just future. I want to thank everyone for attending my presentation, and I'm open to questions right now.
Can I ask the first question as your very proud chair?
Yes.
I was speaking and then someone muted me. I don't know if that was you, Angela.
I was trying to unmute you as you were muting, I think,
okay.
so sorry about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to know how you spoke of the role of experts and their commitment to the community. Can you, I don't know, give a little bit more detail on what that might look like? What sort of role would an expert have that you think should be, I mean, there are plenty of experts at Tufts, right, at the university. How do you see the university experts supporting some of these causes?
Yeah, I think CORE, which is within UEP, which is like co-research and co-partnership, it connects the university staff and like students to support community projects. And I think that's what's really important. Instead of like experts coming up with their own ideas about solving issues, really speaking to the community about what they want and what is it that they need help getting done. and providing resources that way, and not necessarily getting all these ideas from the top down, but from the community. And I think that requires a lot of trust. And so that means we have to work in small, probably small incremental phases to get that to happen, and make sure that we are providing the resources to communities that they want, so that they are willing to trust us to provide the expertise.
Yeah, because grant money is usually kind of a top-down thing, right? A researcher, an expert gets money to study a certain thing, and it's not necessarily the thing that the community wants or needs. So it might also suggest a change to how funds are raised and spent on research.
Yeah, and I think also to that point, I think something even recently with COVID, I was reading an article about how there's oftentimes funding is siloed for like one specific department as opposed to the interconnections. And so, yeah, we do need to change our funding structure, the way funding and philanthropy works, or federal funding works, in order to make sure that we're actually supporting and targeting the issues in a way that creates change, instead of like piecemealing our fixes and doing Band-Aid fixes.
I have a question, and I don't know if this is a repetition of what Mary asked. I hope it's not. So in terms of accessing electoral power, you know, when I think about electoral power, I think elections, I think they're spaced apart by several years. Can you talk about accessing electoral power in terms of the timing of that and what that means when you're trying to advance an agenda?
Yeah. So yes, there is this timing component of an electoral power. One thing one of the organizers had shared with me, the Citizen Advisory Group was one of the easiest things to get to happen, because they ended up organizing around the same time, like the same year the election was happening. So there was a lot of push for the 501c4 to be able to help and support that. And so I'd say, one, we need to make sure everyone knows that elections are happening more frequently than they think, because most times we, like, organizations might know this, but the public, we often get like sidetracked by just like presidential elections, which is real, but making sure that we understand when local elections happen. And the local election process isn't just the voting day, right? Like, people need to get onto the list and the candidates list. And so that's a place where 501c4s can also be supportive in like helping make sure that we are supporting candidates who are not yet candidates, right? Like getting people to the point of being a candidate. And so there's like constant work. I feel like the election cycle never really ends. There might be like a short respite, but most of the time there isn't. And during that respite, that would be a time to help make sure that there is support for 501c4s, especially from community-based organizations. I know, for example, Neighbor to Neighbor struggled this past couple election cycle, or this last election cycle, because the state had changed the way 501c4s could work and the way that staff time could be divvied up for that, and that made it harder for a community organization to do their electoral work. So how are we working with in state and like federal laws to make sure that that is happening when like the non-election periods, so that 501c4s can work the way that they need to work, or communities can work the way that they need to work once the election cycle does start. And then during the election cycle, making sure people understand how do people become candidates, supporting that piece, supporting the candidate endorsement process, because that's a whole nother process, and then going from each step, because the election is so much more than just the voting day.
Thank you.
Catherine, can you share anything about the continuation of your research?
Yeah. I haven't. I mean, I'm pretty much done as of right now. So I'm like trying to take my 80-page thesis and delve into this individual parts of it. So that's kind of where this research is. But in terms of where I think this research could go, there's a lot of different pieces. And I think specifically for this presentation, one thing research could go into is really understanding what democratization is. There's so many conceptions of what democracy is and the way that democracy is practiced in the US and across the world. And it's really important that when we think of democracy, I know all of us think about like US democracy, at least US democracy, but there's so many other ways of understanding democracy and seeing how it's practiced in different places, especially in places where the political climate might be different, or the way that different citizens and or people not considered as citizens are able to participate, because just because you're not a citizen doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to participate in democracy. So I think that's kind of like the place where I would love to see this research go, if and if I were to continue to do it, or if someone else wanted to like look into it.
Thank you. We have a few more minutes. Are there any other questions? There's a question in the chat. Can you talk a little bit about how communication with community members can happen? For example,
Yeah.
you mentioned an op-ed in the local paper. Just wondering if community members read the local paper, how else do they communicate?
Yeah, so how AHH worked is they would have meetings regularly. So that wasn't like necessarily the way that community members in the coalition worked. There was a lot of communication, just meeting, going door to door. That's like a huge piece of a lot of organizing work, is going door to door, going to meetings where people might already be, or places where people hang out generally. And so in using everyday conversations as a way to communicate, yeah, using the papers help show, like, I feel like the media is like a one level, right? Like where like something is happening in the like grassroots, and then like things are coming up to the media. Like we can see that right now with everything that's going on with Black Lives Matter, and with like the murder of George Floyd, right? Like, but what I see on the news is different from what I necessarily see on like my Instagram feed, or how I'm talking with my community. And so recognizing that like what is in the media is like, it takes a while to get there, or and the way that the media receives that and like interprets that is different from what might be the conversation. So a lot of these conversations are already happening, and it really is dependent on making sure that communities aren't isolated, that individuals aren't isolated, because when they are isolated, they won't be able to communicate and develop relationship. And developing those relationships are really important to then help organize and galvanize people to move towards a vision.
I had a related question. I was just able to unmute myself. How do you think that the fact that for the near future, a lot of public outreach is going to be online, like how do you think that's going to affect grassroots organizations?
Yeah, I think one, there's definitely a lot of hesitancy, because there are definitely populations that are not online, right? And so it's really important to make sure that populations who are often marginalized are the ones who might not be online. And so thinking about how we can like reach out to them. And so that might be doing like phone calls and making sure that's still part of the repertoire, or making sure that like trying to figure out ways to like be at a safe distance when communicating. Like I know some people have done like little slips of paper and then knocking on doors, and so that people can like receive the paper without necessarily conversing with one another. Recognizing that, right, like even in this time of like online engagement, people who are in community with one another are talking to each other already. And so tapping into those community members and leaders who are like connected, it kind of follows like the mutual aid pod, like what's it called, like system, where like someone has connection with people. And so it's making sure that that people with financial capital or people with expertise are making sure that they're tapping into the networks that are already there. And it's like kind of like a log, right? Like when you roll over a log, you see all the things that are happening. Like all of those things are happening in our community now. And when we look from like the big picture, it doesn't look like it. And so we have to be really constant, be really connected to the community, especially like core leaders who have ideas and like who might have talked to people without access to online to connect. And then also using online as an opportunity, because it does allow a lot more freedom for people who do have it to be able to connect, so that they're not, so that they can provide their feedback and ideas.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We're just about at time now. Thank you, Catherine. This is a really interesting presentation. We will be sharing the recording for anyone that's interested to share with your colleagues. And if you have any questions, I'm sure Catherine would be welcome to receive those via email. So thank you all for joining us. And a message from Dean Cook thank you again for doing this, Catherine.
Yeah, and thank you all for coming and asking questions. questions and helping me think through more about what I'm learning.